Hi, this is Dr. David Gersten. Today I'm going to be talking about a new serious health challenge that I'm calling quarantine stress disorder, or QSD. I've done a lot of research on this new disorder and have asked every patient about QSD symptoms. Let me start by clarifying a couple of things. COVID-19 is the name of an illness caused by SARS-CoV-2, which is also known as coronavirus. So we have a virus and we have the illness COVID. So this is the virus that causes the illness known as COVID-19. Social restrictions and quarantine have led to massive challenges for people who have been locked out of their job. A study in August 2020 showed that the United States has only regained 42% of the 22 million jobs lost. 8 million Americans have slipped into poverty. Over the last few months, I've seen and heard about painful emotional experiences unlike anything I've seen in 40 years as a psychiatrist. Quarantine stress disorder is a reaction to the constant onslaught of stressors and chaos that we've all had to deal with in 2020. Each stressor can be experienced as a trauma. The biology of trauma is the freeze response, which can cause numbness, which can be mental or physical, immobility, dissociation, and helplessness. Trauma with the freeze response is PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder. Because each crisis has been immediately followed by another crisis and another, people responding with the freeze response are often totally unaware of what's happening to them. The freeze response is the third survival mechanism along with fight and flight. The freeze response kicks in when we're in a real or perceived dangerous situation in which we can't overpower the aggressor and there's no way to escape. In addition to PTSD, which is trauma and the freeze response, people with quarantine stress disorder are experiencing time distortion, a breakdown of daily routine, lack of exercise, social isolation, lack of physical touch, painful loneliness, a sense of powerlessness, overwhelming fear and dread, and identity confusion. People with identity confusion may ask themselves, who am I? Where am I? What has happened to me? With quarantine stress disorder, there's a progression of symptoms over time. After a few months, destabilization sets in. The economy, small businesses, and police departments have been disrupted or even closed. Destabilization starts as an internal, individual process. Free speech is punished, and then it diminishes. Unpredictability, uncertainty, and lack of trust deepen. This is the key to understanding quarantine stress disorder, so I will repeat that. Unpredictability, uncertainty, and lack of trust deepen. The final set of stressors or causes involve destabilizing our identity. Life becomes about chaos, uncertainty, and feeling powerless. The loss of daily routine deepens our isolation, immobility, and stress. Many of us get used to the new normal, and many people surrender to the new normal. Identity confusion is the final piece of this puzzle. Our deep sense of who we are starts to fall apart. Life starts to feel unreal. We don't know who we are anymore. This is a very scary situation. People wonder, who am I now? Where am I now? What in the world has happened to me? We have two categories of causes of quarantine stress disorder. First, we have symptoms caused by PTSD. Second, we have psychosocial, non-traumatic causes. I've covered a few of those non-traumatic causes. The combined causes, PTSD with the freeze response and psychosocial causes, involve being bombarded by an endless stream of scary images and short slogans like flatten the curve, stay indoors, wear a mask and save lives, stay home, stay safe. These images and slogans make us feel that the world has become a dangerous place. Whether you check guidelines from the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, Dr. Anthony Fauci, or the Lancet Medical Journal, there is agreement that cloth masks do not prevent spread of a virus. March 20th, 2020, the CDC said, quote, "The CDC does not recommend that people who are well wear a face mask," unquote. The Lancet reported that, quote, "There is scarce evidence that masks provide protection against respiratory infections," unquote. On June 19th, 2020, the American College of Physicians said that there is no solid evidence that masks help stop the spread of coronavirus. The holes in cloth masks are thousands of times larger than a virus. Viruses easily pass in and out of masks. If your research informs you that masks don't work, being forced to wear them goes against your conscience and your will, and that can be a traumatic reaction for you. In early 2020, the CDC announced that they had been wrong about how deadly COVID-19 is, and they had vastly overestimated how many people would die from COVID. For 6 months, the CDC was sharing doctored data. Many believe that standing 6 feet apart is scientifically proven to stop the spread of coronavirus, but many European nations use 3 feet apart as their standard. German and Australian authorities recommend about 4.5 feet apart. There is no science supporting the notion that standing 3, 4.5, or 6 feet apart has any major benefit. Some governors keep changing the recommended distance that we're supposed to maintain. I'm not trying to tell you what you should do, but I am encouraging you to do your own research. We are now in a phase in which people wearing masks are attacking people who are not wearing masks. We need to commit to communicating our differences of opinion with civility and respect. United we stand, divided we will fall. Judy Sorrell, past president of the American Association of Suicidology, believes that COVID-19 may lead to 75,000 more deaths by suicide than is usual. The stressors that give rise to QSD can lead to mild symptoms, serious symptoms, or suicide. People kill themselves when they feel trapped, hopeless, and helpless. They're suffering badly and they don't see a way out. It's like being locked in a cage without a key to help you escape. That is the level of despair that leads to suicide. Quarantine stress disorder involves a fragmenting of the individual and of society. It involves large societal groups that have become at odds with each other. It involves neighbor against neighbor, friend against friend, even family member against family member. Quarantine stress disorder has become a personal problem as well as a very big social problem. Let's look at a short list of the crises and uncertainties that we have faced in 2020 that can lead to fight, flight, freeze physiology. They include Trump impeachment, COVID-19 with restrictions, social distancing, enforced mask wearing, lockdown, mandates for standing 6 feet apart, George Floyd, Trump assassination attempt, riots, historic statues toppled, heat wave with massive fires, warnings of COVID round 2, more fires, loss of our jobs, and a strange contested election. Today I woke up to hear the news that California is now expecting more fires. Each crisis has been presented with equal intensity along with mandates which have no legal power. People respond to each event with high intensity. These don't sound like they are severe traumas like the PTSD of war, a severe car accident, or being attacked. Our brain reacts the same way to trauma, whether that trauma involves being chased by a mountain lion or being yelled at by your boss and being afraid that if you respond, you might lose your job. How are we all handling the COVID quarantine? Let's first see how we did with the SARS pandemic in 2003. SARS, or severe acute respiratory syndrome, was caused by a coronavirus. Symptoms of PTSD were observed in about 30% of respondents. Studies done in Hong Kong found that 40% of the survivors had post-traumatic stress symptoms. According to the American Psychiatric Association, the APA, in 2020, 30% of Americans say that the COVID quarantine crisis is having a serious impact on their mental health, and most say that it's affecting their daily lives. I'm going to briefly discuss the DSM criteria for PTSD. The DSM is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. In reviewing the DSM criteria, one thing is missing. There's no mention of the mechanism of PTSD, which is the freeze response. With that said, here are the symptoms of PTSD. In PTSD, the traumatic event is persistently re-experienced in the form of nightmares and flashbacks. People begin to avoid trauma-related stimuli, which can trigger PTSD through the freeze response. There may be negative changes in mood and cognition, decreased interest in activities, feeling isolated, and having difficulty experiencing positive moods and mental states. One of my patients started a session by saying, quote, "I can't get the murder image out of my mind." I replied, "You mean George Floyd?" She anxiously replied, "Yes." This is an example of a PTSD flashback. People with PTSD experience changes in arousal and reactivity, which manifests as irritability or aggression, hypervigilance, heightened startle response, and difficulty concentrating. I chose not to begin this video by talking about PTSD for a reason. Many people have preconceived ideas about PTSD, and I wanted to present quarantine stress disorder without attaching it to another disorder. We can better understand QSD without saying it's just another version of PTSD. Trauma with the freeze response is PTSD. Quarantine stress disorder is PTSD plus symptoms caused by psychosocial stressors. Now let's look at what trauma is all about. Now that we've begun to learn about quarantine stress disorder, let's return to further explore the freeze response, which is the biology of trauma. But before going into detail about the freeze response, we need to understand trauma, which gives rise to the freeze response. According to trauma expert Bessel van der Kolk, quote, "Trauma involves an inescapably stressful event that overwhelms our existing coping mechanism," unquote. Dozens of individual events going on in our world right now can cause us to respond in a traumatic way. But what exactly is a traumatic response? Trauma is caused by extremely stressful events that shatter our sense of security. They make us feel helpless, hopeless, powerless, and overwhelmed in a world we now perceive as being dangerous. A traumatic experience is any event in life that causes a threat to our safety. Trauma temporarily disrupts our ability to function normally in our daily routines. Things that we used to do without much effort become very difficult. Trauma, whether psychological or physical, can cause anxiety, isolation, disturbing emotions, flashbacks, nightmares, and memories that don't go away. Traumatic experiences involve a threat or a perceived threat to our life or safety. These experiences overwhelm us. Any event or experience that overwhelms us and leaves us feeling isolated can cause trauma. It's not the objective reality of the event that determines if a person will experience the event as being traumatic. It's our subjective response to the event that determines if the event will be traumatic. The more helpless, powerless, and scared we feel, the more likely we are to be traumatized. Whether an event is experienced as a trauma depends on our resilience, our access to family, friends, and healers, and the presence or absence of childhood trauma earlier in life. Childhood abuse and neglect can be experienced as traumas. Everybody knows about fight or flight, but the freeze response was discovered only a few decades ago. I'll use the example of an impala trying to escape a cheetah to illustrate the freeze response. As soon as the cheetah charges, the impala's sympathetic nervous system instantly revs up, setting in motion fight or flight physiology. The heart rate increases, blood flow to large muscles increases, and the impala then runs for its life. An impala can run 50 miles an hour at top speed. If a cheetah is 1 second from killing an impala, sometimes the impala will roll over as if it hit a brick wall. It will flop upside down, and its consciousness checks out. If you were to wave your fingers in front of the impala's eyes, it wouldn't see you. A predator won't attack a dead animal, and an animal in the freeze response looks dead. The cheetah will either turn around and leave, or grab the impala by the ankle and drag it back to its den. In nature, the freeze response lasts 5 minutes. If the cheetah has cubs to take care of, the impala may survive. 5 minutes after the freeze response started and the threat is gone, the lights turn back on for the impala and its consciousness returns. After a few minutes, it struggles to its feet, shakes and trembles, and then returns to fight-or-flight physiology. It runs for it, and that's the end of the story for the impala, at least for today. The freeze response is a physiological response to perceived danger that involves the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems, which are the two parts of the autonomic nervous system. The sympathetic fight-or-flight nervous system acts like our body's accelerator, and the parasympathetic nervous system acts as our body's brakes. The sympathetic nervous system is revved up when we need to run or fight for our life. In fight-or-flight physiology, our adrenal glands produce large amounts of cortisol and adrenaline, which are our stress hormones. If a person or animal perceives that it's not going to win the fight or find a way to escape, the parasympathetic nervous system kicks in and puts on the brakes. Normally, the parasympathetic nervous system is involved in relaxing, recovering, and digesting food. The parasympathetic nervous system keeps all of our internal organs working. Those include the digestive tract, immune system, heart rate, and breathing, to name a few. In the freeze response, the parasympathetic nervous system is so dominant that we freeze. We may feel mentally and physically immobilized, numb, and disconnected. We can connect and disconnect in relation to self, others, nature, and God or a higher power. As I mentioned earlier, the freeze response can make people feel numb, powerless, helpless, immobilized, and dissociated or disconnected. Emotional numbness means feeling nothing. What is the impact of being constantly bombarded with messages of danger and fear? What is the impact of not knowing if our leaders are telling us the truth or not? Our sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems are likely to be quite out of balance due to the uncertainty and the endless chaos. Not everyone is responding to the chaos and uncertainty with the freeze response, but millions of people are dealing with chronic stress, a state in which we're in fight-or-flight physiology. Chronic stress, which is mediated by the adrenal glands and the sympathetic nervous system, can cause anxiety, depression, fatigue, feeling on edge, and feeling easily triggered. With chronic stress, the adrenal glands become dysregulated, pumping out high amounts of cortisol and adrenaline, the two main stress hormones. Over months or years, cortisol levels start to drop, which leads to fatigue and mental dullness. With prolonged stress, the adrenal glands start to fatigue. People have been forced into social isolation, which is really painful loneliness. Loneliness is made more painful when people are told they cannot meet with their family and they should avoid hugging or touching anyone. So we retreat into our loneliness, and many people feel as if they don't fit in anymore. Many activities that once connected us with others have become taboo and prohibited. At least that's what we've been told. We don't know anymore who we can safely talk to, who we can be open with. If we cannot gather with our loved ones during times of joy or grief, the fabric of families and societies starts to fragment. Loneliness can cause people to feel helpless and impotent. Most people work 8-hour days. They sleep for about 8 hours and they have 8 hours that are not structured. When we work, we set our alarm clock at a certain time, we eat breakfast at a certain time, shower at a certain time, and head to work at a certain time. For most people, work is the main structure in our life, and it's also an important part of our identity and self-esteem. People who have hobbies, play a musical instrument, or engage in some kind of art can adjust to the new uncertainty and lack of structure by turning toward their passion. The natural structures in our life are like an invisible clock. When we're isolated and lack structure, the sense of time starts to fall apart. When time falls apart, many people fall apart internally. In normal life, we know when each event begins and ends, and that regularity provides rhythm and timing in our life. We need to rebuild structure in our life during COVID quarantine. If loneliness is challenging for you, and you find it hard to live without structure, you may find yourself endlessly watching TV, playing video games, doing anything you can think of to fill the void, or slipping into addiction. Lockdown is a word we're all used to, but it's not a word that's appropriate to an innocent public. Lockdown refers to locking up prisoners in jail. Quarantine is another misused word. Quarantine refers to an emergency health crisis. Emergencies, by definition, don't go on and on forever. They might last a few weeks. That's what a medical emergency is. On March 11th, 2020, the World Health Organization declared a pandemic. It's now 8 months since that announcement, and many governors and mayors continue to demand lockdowns, prevent singing in groups, and close businesses. In some states, we've been told that we should be wearing masks even when we are alone indoors. We have not been dealing with an emergency for all of these 8 months. Who is supposed to be quarantined? Healthy people? People proven to be sick with a particular contagious disease are the ones who are usually quarantined. Healthy people are not quarantined. This policy is politics, not a policy that educated doctors and scientists would advocate. Trauma is about unpredictability, helplessness, powerlessness, perceived danger, and lack of trust. With trauma, the routines in our lives change minute by minute and day by day. Unpredictability creates uncertainty about life. With trauma, a person cannot do what they want to do, and they're not able to change their external situation. As complex and painful as quarantine stress disorder can be, we can take steps to help stay centered and in balance. Some important steps to take include a healthy diet, meditation, prayer, exercise, normal sleep patterns, staying connected to family and friends, and building structure and routine into your life. If you're not working, your structure has probably fallen apart. Structure different activities throughout the day using a clock to help with that structure. Exercise at certain times. Go for a walk at a specific time. Build mental fitness techniques into your daily routine. Mental fitness techniques include meditation, mental imagery, breath work, and mood words. Call friends or video chat at a specific time every day. There's an iPhone app called Chirp that allows you to program activities throughout the day and then be reminded to do them. Yoga has been proven to help alleviate trauma and the freeze response. So add yoga to your daily routine. This could be a good time to learn some yoga if it's not currently part of your life. Quarantine stress disorder, or QSD, is complicated, but here's a quick way to think about QSD. Quarantine stress disorder is PTSD plus symptoms caused by psychosocial non-freeze stressors. PTSD is trauma with the freeze response. The freeze response causes a person to feel numb, immobilized, and disconnected. The psychosocial non-freeze causes include extreme uncertainty, isolation, dread, powerlessness, helplessness, lack of exercise, lack of touch, loss of daily routine, time distortion, and identity confusion. I want to be clear that this video is not about an infection with coronavirus. If you think you have the symptoms of COVID-19, find a doctor with a lot of experience in treating it. This video is about the mental, emotional, and spiritual problems that are not related to infection with coronavirus, but are related to the quarantine. What I've shared does not just apply to the United States. The entire world is dealing with coronavirus, COVID-19, and the quarantine. Just as the virus spread from one country to another, citizens of each country are dealing with quarantine stress disorder. We're talking about millions of people in 195 countries who are likely to be struggling with QSD. I'll provide links below this video to experts in the field of trauma and PTSD. Dr. Peter Levine discovered the freeze response and developed a treatment modality called somatic experiencing. This is a modality that helps thaw the freeze response. I've included YouTube links and a link to his book, Waking the Tiger, Healing Trauma. Another good resource is NICABM, the National Institute for the Clinical Application of Behavioral Medicine. The world's experts in trauma are affiliated with NICABM. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk is one of the top experts and pioneers in trauma. Each of these experts have YouTube videos, websites, and books explaining trauma and providing simple tools that you can use right away. These experts are dealing with the PTSD part of quarantine stress disorder, but not the psychosocial causes. I highly recommend that you do your own research on the issues I've raised. Become your own authority. Learn to trust your own wisdom. Learn to trust your intuition. I have a deep faith and belief that we're going to come out of this period of history with peace and unity. I don't expect us all to feel peaceful within a couple of weeks. To get there, it's important to avoid blaming people for making choices that we disagree with. It will probably continue to be a rocky road for a while, but I believe that the causes of quarantine stress disorder will become a thing of the past. It should be obvious by now that this video is not a joke. QSD is a theory. It's a concept to help explain a host of symptoms. I am not presenting quarantine stress disorder as a fact supported by years of research, but I don't want to wait years to release this video. I want people to be informed. I want to help people understand the suffering that started with the quarantine of 2020. I invite you to share this video with family, friends, doctors, and scientists. If this video saves one life, it will have served its purpose, and it will have started to reset our understanding of the struggles that many of us have been going through. Thank you for listening and taking the time to understand quarantine stress disorder. Have a great day.